Welcome to this story about one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in the history of Pensacola. Before we start, I'd like you to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We want to know where these stories reach and what times people are listening. The Tane Plantation looked like a beautiful white jewel standing tall against the green land of South Carolina's countryside. Its tall columns reached up toward the sky like praying hands, but no prayer could erase the terrible things that happened inside. In the summer of 1836, people in Charleston thought the estate was very successful. The rice fields grew lots of crops. The horses were beautiful, and other plantation owners wanted horses just like them. The owner, Mrs. Delilah Tane, was respected for keeping the plantation running so well even though her husband had died. Delilah had buried her husband, Colonel William Tane, 3 winters before. Most widows might have had trouble running such a big estate, but Delilah did very well. Under her control, the plantation made even more money, which surprised many rich people in Charleston. "Mrs. Tane, you continue to amaze us," Judge Hale said during a summer party on the porch. "Your cotton harvest was even bigger than the Pinckney plantation this season." Delilah, a 45-year-old woman with thin features that were once pretty when she was young but now looked hard from time, smiled carefully. "God helps those who help themselves, Judge Hale," she replied. What the judge and society didn't see was how Delilah helped herself. Behind the mansion's shiny front, past the well-kept gardens where her 3 daughters visited with young men, there was a separate building hidden by a group of oak trees. The enslaved people called it the breeding house, though they never said this when white people could hear. That evening, after the guests left and the sun was setting over the plantation, Delilah went to her office with account books open on her wooden desk. The plantation's boss, a big, rough man named Silas Webb, waited for her with his hat in his worn hands. "The new girl came from the Dalton auction," he told her. "She's strong and healthy. She should bring a good price for her first baby." Delilah nodded without looking up from her math. "Have Dr. Parnell check her tomorrow. I won't pay extra if she can't have babies." Her pen scratched across the page carefully. "And what about Mercy's baby?" "Born this morning. A healthy boy, just the right size." A cold smile crossed Delilah's thin lips. "Excellent. That makes 3 this month. The traders from Georgia will be happy." What they didn't say out loud was that Mercy was not an enslaved person, but a helper for Delilah's own daughter. She was just 16 years old and was forced to get pregnant by Delilah's orders. The baby would be written down as enslaved, and who his mother was would be erased. In the East Wing, Delilah's 3 daughters, Caroline, Josephine, and Beatrice, got ready for bed. Each one was keeping secrets that would soon crash together into a nightmare no one could escape. Caroline, who was 22, stared out her window toward the slave quarters, her hand touching her stomach without thinking. Josephine, who was 20, wrote quickly in a diary she kept hidden under a loose board in the floor. Beatrice, who was just 17, cried quietly into her pillow, scared of her mother's plans for her upcoming birthday. None of them saw that a newly arrived house slave named Isaiah was watching the Tane mansion from the shadows of the oak trees. His sister had disappeared into Delilah's breeding program 3 months earlier, and he had gotten himself sold to the Tane estate on purpose with one goal: to find the truth and, if he could, escape with her. The cicadas screamed through the hot night as a storm gathered on the edge of the sky. By morning, rain would fall on the Tane plantation, but it would be nothing compared to the flood of secrets that were about to overwhelm them all. Isaiah's first morning at Tane began before the sun came up. His body still hurt from the trip from Virginia. He had been bought along with 5 other men at the Charleston slave market, chosen because they were strong. As he scrubbed the marble floor in the entry hall while Agatha, the head house slave, watched carefully, he listened quietly for any word about his sister Ruth. "Keep your head down and your ears open in this house," Agatha whispered as she walked by, her voice barely loud enough to hear. "Being curious here can get you killed." Isaiah nodded slightly and kept watching quietly. The house was already waking up above him. He could hear the soft steps of the daughters moving between rooms, the sometimes sharp commands from Delilah herself, and the hurried answers from the other house slaves. By late morning, he had been moved to work in the stables, where he met Jonas, an older enslaved man who had worked on the plantation for nearly 30 years. Jonas's empty eyes showed he was a man who had seen too many terrible things. "You're new," Jonas said as they cleaned the horse stalls. "Where did they bring you from?" "Virginia," Isaiah answered carefully. "Hanover County." Jonas nodded, looking around for bosses coming near. "Do you have a reason for being here?" "Most men brought in lately have a reason." Before Isaiah could answer, Silas Webb arrived, tracking mud from the morning rain. Both men immediately looked down and worked harder. "You," Webb said, pointing at Isaiah. "Mrs. Taine wants the new people examined. Take this message to Dr. Parnell in town." He handed Isaiah a sealed envelope. The errand was unexpected good luck. Isaiah had hoped for any chance to see the plantation, and now he was being sent beyond its borders. Maybe he could gather information in town, or at least memorize what the property looked like for later. The walk to Charleston took nearly an hour. Dr. Parnell's office was near the harbor, a nice building marked with a shiny metal plate. Isaiah delivered the envelope to a pale assistant. "Wait here," the assistant said, and disappeared inside. Isaiah used the few minutes of freedom to look at his surroundings. Nearby, two white men spoke in quiet voices. "Taine's widow is sending another dozen next week," one said, checking his watch. "Fine stock, even if a little young. The market is eager. Taine's breeding program is the best in the state," replied the other. Isaiah's heart beat fast. His fears were true. The Taine plantation was forcing enslaved people to have babies after the law stopped people from buying enslaved people from other countries. His sister could really be there, forced into the cruel cycle of having children who would be sold away from her. The assistant came back with another envelope. For Mrs. Taine only. Isaiah's walk back followed a slightly different path, letting him see the back of the property. Behind the main house, past the kitchen gardens, he saw the hidden building. Unlike ordinary slave cabins, it had glass windows, though heavy curtains covered them. A white-dressed woman, not an enslaved person, went in through a locked door carrying what looked like medical supplies. That night, while other field workers slept, Isaiah slipped away to meet Phyllis, an elderly kitchen slave who felt sorry for him. Behind the smokehouse, where the smell of curing meat covered their whispers, he spoke. "My sister," Isaiah began. "Ruth. She should have arrived 3 months ago." Phyllis's worn face showed sadness. "That building you saw, they call it the infirmary to nice folks. That's where they keep the breeding women. Is she there?" Isaiah's voice broke. Phyllis nodded sadly. "Yes. But whatever you're planning, stop. No one ever leaves that place. Mrs. Taine has the law, the church, and guns on her side." "The daughters?" Isaiah pushed. Phyllis looked toward the house. "Caroline, the oldest, she's just like her mother. Josephine, she writes things down. Dangerous things. Beatrice, the youngest, is next. When she turns 18, Mrs. Taine has plans for her too." Phyllis stiffened. "Someone's coming. Go." Isaiah disappeared into the shadows as the night guard walked by with his lantern swinging. He couldn't sleep. Phyllis's words echoed in his mind. The Taine plantation was worse than he had imagined, and at its center was a mystery that even the cruelest actions couldn't fully explain. Josephine Taine's hands shook as she lifted the floorboard under her bed. The house had gotten quiet. Mother was in her office counting money. Caroline was entertaining a neighbor's son in the living room, and Beatrice had cried herself to sleep after another talk about her duties to the family. From the hidden space, Josephine pulled out a leather notebook and a small bottle of ink. Her record-keeping had started 2 years ago as simple notes about the plantation's work and the strange visits by Dr. Parnell, but over time it had become both something she had to do and a dangerous act. August 17, 1836. Another girl taken to the infirmary today. Her name is Ruth. 17 women now held there. Mother has ordered special food, fresh meat and molasses, things not given to regular field workers. Dr. Parnell now visits twice a week. Josephine paused, remembering the terrible truth she discovered last winter. Her father's death was not from natural causes. Hidden in her mother's private notebook, separate from regular accounts, She found 20 years of a program so careful and cruel it was hard to understand. Selected women were forced to get pregnant. Delilah experimented with bloodlines, mixing different people to control outcomes. Most horrifying, her sisters' names were written down. Caroline brought in at 18 as supervisor of maternal health. Beatrice scheduled for her first term at 18. A soft knock at the door almost made Josephine spill her ink. She quickly put the floorboard back. "Yes," she called. The door opened to show Esther, a house slave with her eyes looking down. "Miss Caroline asks for you in the living room. Mr. Blackwood has brought his brother." Josephine calmed herself. "I'll be down soon." These visits were never casual. Mother planned them, judging potential husbands based on their genes and social standing. The Blackwoods were wealthy and well-known. If Mother approved, Josephine would be expected to encourage the match, a thought that made her sick. Downstairs, the living room glowed with candlelight. Caroline sat perfectly, laughing at Thomas Blackwood's jokes. Beside him, his younger brother, Lieutenant James Blackwood, newly returned from military service, stood stiffly in formal clothes. At 25, his soldier-like bearing and alert eyes looked around the room. "Miss Taine," he greeted with a bow. "Your sister speaks highly of your achievements." "Caroline is too kind," Josephine replied, sitting down. "I hear about your time on the frontier, Lieutenant. Quite an adventure, I imagine." As James described the Western Territories, Josephine noticed Isaiah, the new house slave, entering the room carrying a tray of refreshments. Their eyes met briefly, too briefly for anyone else to notice, but long enough for Josephine to sense something important. This man moved differently from the others. His movements had purpose, and his carefully lowered eyes suggested he was aware of everything. The conversation flowed as expected until Delilah Taine entered, perfectly timed to appear casual, though everything about the evening was planned. She looked at Lieutenant Blackwood with the same cold examination she used when judging livestock. "Lieutenant," she said with a warm tone that didn't reach her eyes, "how lucky to have you join us tonight. I understand your family's rice plantation is next to our southern fields. Perhaps tomorrow you might tour the Taine operations. We have some new methods I think will interest a forward-thinking young planter." Josephine felt a chill. Her mother never invited outsiders to inspect the plantation without a reason. What role did Lieutenant Blackwood play in her plans? Later that night, she wrote in her journal, "Mother has taken an interest in Lieutenant James Blackwood. He is to tour the plantation tomorrow, though I doubt the infirmary is part of it. Caroline seems to know about this arrangement. Beatrice's birthday is coming too quickly. Whatever Mother plans, I must find a way to stop it. Perhaps the new house slave Isaiah could help. Something about his manner suggests he is not what he appears." Outside her window, thunder rolled as another summer storm came closer. Josephine couldn't shake the feeling it was a warning for the trouble about to strike. Dr. Maxwell Parnell was very careful. His tools were spotless, his records perfect, his observations scientific. These qualities made him very valuable to Delilah Taine's operation. Over the past 10 years, he worked in what the plantation enslaved people called the breeding house, officially called the infirmary. He kept the same professional attitude as in his Charleston practice. 12 rooms held 1 or 2 women each, depending on how far along they were in pregnancy or recovery. 16 women were there currently, 3 in their final month, 4 who had given birth in the past 2 weeks. Subject 23 shows excellent recovery, he noted to Nurse Hammond, a stern woman who was fired from a Boston hospital before joining Mrs. Taine. Milk production is abundant. Infant is gaining weight properly. Subject 23, Ruth, sat in a rocking chair by the window, nursing a 10-day-old baby. Her eyes were empty, her spirit crushed by months of being held captive and knowing her child would be taken and sold within weeks. Continue for subjects 17 through 22. Stop for 23 until the baby is weaned. Mrs. Taine wants her ready for the next cycle by November, Nurse Hammond reported. Their scientific talk stopped with a knock at the main door. Nurse Hammond answered, returning with a sealed note. "Mrs. Taine asks for you at dinner tonight. She's entertaining the Blackwood brothers and wants to discuss their bloodlines." Dr. Parnell nodded. These dinners were carefully planned by Delilah to judge potential husbands for her daughters based on traits she wanted in her program. The doctor no longer questioned if what he was doing was right or wrong. The research was too valuable, the payment too good. Later he paused outside a locked room at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, this door had no window. Only he and Delilah had keys. Inside, stored in jars, were failed experiments. Badly formed babies, stillbirths, unsuccessful crossings. Delilah insisted on keeping them for study. Beside the jars were very detailed records. Unknown to others, some specimens came from Delilah's own family. The horror of the Tane plantation went beyond slavery into something much darker. Delilah was controlling the bloodlines of her own family to create superior people. Outside, Isaiah worked in the garden, hearing conversations through open windows. The planned tour for Lieutenant Blackwood had started. Delilah was showing him her rice and cotton fields. "Your irrigation is impressive, Mrs. Tane," Blackwood remarked. "I'm impressed by your knowledge of farming. Necessity creates innovation, Lieutenant. When my husband died, many expected failure under a woman's control. I was determined to prove them wrong. You've succeeded. Your harvests are the envy of the county." Delilah's smile was sharp. "But you haven't seen our most profitable operation. Perhaps after dinner, if you're interested." "Animal breeding." Isaiah, trimming nearby bushes, felt his blood run cold. The animal breeding building was the breeding house. Was she planning to show a military man that part of the plantation? During dinner, Isaiah watched carefully. Caroline charmed Thomas Blackwood. Josephine was paired with James, though her conversation felt forced. Beatrice, the youngest, barely touched her food, flinching whenever someone spoke to her. "I understand your family is interested in selective breeding," Delilah said over dessert. "Your father's racehorses are famous." "Yes, ma'am," James replied, "though our stablemaster deserves the credit. I've been away too long. You understand the rules, though. Selecting traits, maintaining bloodlines. After dinner, I'll show you a project few outsiders have seen." Isaiah nearly dropped the pitcher he was carrying. He had to warn Phyllis and Josephine. The tour would almost certainly include the infirmary where his sister was being held. Whispering to Phyllis, he said, "She's showing him the breeding house tonight." Phyllis's eyes widened. "Then she plans to involve him. Nobody sees that place unless they're part of it. I need to get in," Isaiah said. "You'll get yourself killed and her too," Phyllis warned. She slipped him a small key to the back door of the wash house, which connected to the infirmary through an underground passage. "If you're caught, we all suffer," she said, her voice shaking. Outside, the storm raged, giving Isaiah cover. Tonight might be his only chance to reach Ruth. But what waited for him inside the infirmary would be worse than he imagined. A horror beyond slavery into science and human dignity that could shake Charleston society. Beatrice stared at her reflection, hollow-eyed, barely recognizing herself. In less than 6 weeks, she would turn 18. And her mother had made it clear what that meant. New dresses, strict diet, frequent checkups by Dr. Parnell, preparations for her family duty. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Josephine entered without waiting, closing the door. "We need to talk," she whispered, "about Mother's plans for you." Beatrice's hands shook. "I can't, Josie, I just can't." Josephine sat beside her. "Listen, what happened to Caroline, the infirmary? It's all part of something terrible. Mother isn't just breeding enslaved people. I know," Beatrice interrupted. "Caroline said it's my duty to the family, to the bloodline. Father started it all before I was born." Josephine's face went pale. "Caroline admitted that to you?" "That our father was selecting traits in enslaved people, livestock, and us." Beatrice's voice broke. "Caroline says it's scientific." Mother continues his work. "The Tane line will be superior." "It's monstrous," Josephine hissed. "And I won't let it happen to you." Lightning flashed outside, making sharp shadows. Rain hit the windows like desperate fingers. "I've been keeping records," Josephine continued, pulling her journal from a hidden pocket. "Everything I've observed, overheard. Mother's notebook, Dr. Parnell's visits, the women in the infirmary, and now she's bringing Lieutenant Blackwood into it." Beatrice looked up sharply. "What does he have to do with this?" "I don't know yet, but Mother never shows the breeding rooms to anyone outside the inner circle." "If she's bringing him there, she must have plans." Josephine leaned in closer. "We need allies. I think the new house slave, Isaiah, might be able to help us." Beatrice's eyes widened in alarm. "An enslaved person? That's crazy. If Mother finds out..." "His sister is in the infirmary." "He came here on purpose to find her." Josephine took her sister's hands in both of hers. "Tonight, while Mother is busy with the Blackwoods, he will try to reach her." A board creaked somewhere in the hall. Both girls froze, staring at the door. For a long moment, There was terrible silence. Then footsteps moved away down the hallway. "We must be careful," Beatrice whispered. "Caroline reports everything to Mother. And Agatha, the head house slave. She is Mother's eyes and ears. Not all the servants are loyal to her, though." Phyllis in the kitchen is helping Isaiah. Josephine moved to the window to watch rain run down the glass. "Have you ever wondered about our births? About our mothers?" she asked. Beatrice looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Mother bore us all, didn't she?" "Did she?" Josephine answered softly. "I found entries in Father's private journal. He wrote about surrogates and host women. I think," she swallowed, "maybe we were born of the breeding program ourselves." The thought hung between them, too awful to take in at once. If it was true, then their whole lives were the result of careful selection. Their own mothers might be held in the place they called the infirmary. Before Beatrice could speak, a soft tap sounded at the door, a signal Josephine knew well as Phyllis's knock. She opened it a crack and found not Phyllis but Isaiah, his clothes soaked through, eyes wide and urgent. "Miss Josephine," he whispered, "your mother is taking the lieutenant to the infirmary now. I need your help to get my sister out." Josephine glanced back. Beatrice nodded, almost without moving. "We'll help," Josephine said. "But you must help us expose everything that goes on here." "There's more," Isaiah said, his voice tight. "When I used the passage from the wash house, I found something else. A hidden room under the infirmary. Jars." He had to stop. "Jars with babies. Records with names and dates. Your family names." Beatrice made a small wounded sound. Josephine steadied herself against the doorframe. "Show us," she said finally. "Show us everything." As the three unlikely allies prepared to step out into the storm, Caroline waited in the shadows of the hallway, her face unreadable. In her hand was the small pistol their father had given her before he died, the same weapon she had used to end his life when he had threatened to reveal the truth of the breeding program. Caroline had chosen long ago to stand with her mother's vision of a perfected bloodline. She would not let her sister's weakness ruin what they had built. The storm turned the well-kept grounds into a dangerous swamp. Isaiah led the sisters along a faint path that went around the formal gardens, staying near the trunks of great oak trees. Lightning lit their progress in stark frozen flashes. Three figures bent against the downpour, moving like ghosts between two worlds. The wash house stood about 50 yards from the main house, a short brick building. The tunnel entrance was beneath the big copper tubs. Josephine had her journal tucked into her dress, wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. Beatrice followed close, her nightdress soaked, bare feet covered with mud. Neither sister had ever left the main house without proper dress or someone with them. This midnight walk in storm and secrecy was their first real act of rebellion. They reached the wash house without being seen. Inside, Isaiah worked quickly and confidently, sliding a heavy copper tub aside to show a trap door in the stone floor. The hinges protested as he lifted it, showing a narrow flight of steps down into darkness. "How did you learn about this?" Josephine asked above the sound of the rain. "Phyllis," Isaiah replied. "She's worked here 40 years and knows every hidden passage made for servants to move unseen." Beatrice peered into the black pit below. "We need light." Isaiah produced a small tin lantern and struck a match with shaking fingers. The tiny flame painted their faces in strange light as they began to go down. The tunnel was better built than they expected, with brick walls and a packed dirt floor. It ran straight for about 50 yards and then split. The right passage led to the infirmary, Isaiah said. The left he didn't know. Josephine hesitated only a moment. "We'll take the left first. If it connects to Mother's secret room, it may hold the proof we need." The left hallway continued for 20 yards and stopped at a heavy oak door with iron bands. A large padlock held it shut. "We can't break that," Beatrice whispered. Josephine produced a ring of keys she had taken from her mother's study the week before. "I've been waiting for the right moment," she said. The third key fit, and the lock opened with a click that sounded too loud in the narrow space. Isaiah pushed the door open and lifted the lantern. The small room beyond was arranged with careful order. Glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls with rows of specimen jars inside. A large desk stood in the center, its surface crowded with notebooks and odd instruments. The air smelled of chemicals and something sweet and sticking that caught in the throat. Beatrice stumbled back and let out a sound that might have been a prayer or a cry. "Oh, God!" she whispered. Inside each jar floated a preserved human fetus at different stages of growth. Neat labels gave parents, dates of pregnancy, and cause of termination. The notes included deliberate removals when defects were suspected or traits judged undesirable. Josephine moved to the desk with rising dread and opened a leather-bound journal. "These are Dr. Parnell's notes," she breathed. "He's been doing experiments in selective breeding, using enslaved people as subjects." Isaiah stepped closer, lantern held steady, and peered into the cabinets. "These dates go back 20 years, he said, before your mother took full control." Josephine realized it began as our father's project, but Mother made it organized after his death. She turned pages and stopped as a new set of entries caught her eye. "Isaiah, these aren't all from enslaved women," she said. She pointed to entries marked with the family crest. The records showed surrogates used to carry children fathered by selected men, children raised as legitimate members of the family. That explained why Caroline was so loyal. She had been part of it from the start. Josephine felt her voice go hollow. She knows. She was involved from the beginning. But why would she keep doing this? Beatrice asked, her face twisted with horror and confusion. What is the aim of it all? Voices echoed down the right-hand passage, the infirmary direction, carried by the damp air. Delilah's clear tones were unmistakable, and a man's deeper voice answered. Lieutenant Blackwood was being shown what had been promised at dinner. "We have to hide," Isaiah urged, putting out the lantern. "If they find us here?" "No," Josephine cut him off, her voice suddenly firm. "This ends tonight. I'm taking these records. They are evidence of crimes that even Charleston will not ignore." She began stuffing notebooks and journals into a canvas sack she found beneath the desk. Isaiah moved to the trapdoor. "We must reach the infirmary first," he said. "My sister is still there, and your mother is bringing Blackwood too." Josephine nodded. "Beatrice, take these back to the house and hide them under my floorboards," she ordered. "If we're not back by dawn, bring them to Judge Holloway in Charleston." "Only him, do you understand?" Reluctantly, Beatrice tucked the sack under her cloak and slipped away through the tunnel. Josephine and Isaiah retraced their steps to the fork and took the right path, moving as quietly as they could. Voices grew louder as they neared another door. A pool of lamplight spilled into the passageway as they pressed themselves into shadow. Through the open space, they heard a casual, chilling line. "The breeding program produces about 30 babies each year," one voice said, as if discussing the yield of a field. The other answered in the same tone, as if it were a routine fact, not something morally wrong. The three, 2 sisters and a young man desperate to save his family, stood in the dark and listened, each understanding in that moment how deep the secret went and how much danger they had stepped into. "With careful selection, we've raised birth weight by 12% and cut infant deaths to under 5%. "Remarkable results indeed," came Blackwood's reply, his voice oddly flat. "And these women are mostly enslaved, correct?" "Yes, though we've seen success with certain mixed lineage surrogates as well. The secret is strict record-keeping and tightly controlled conditions." Isaiah's face twisted with rage. Josephine put a steadying hand on his arm, shaking her head in warning. They needed to know the full scope of the operation before making any move. "Do you think these methods could be scaled?" Blackwood asked. "With proper oversight? Absolutely. Picture plantations across the South producing not only cotton and tobacco, but specially bred people selected for specific traits, strength, endurance, and a degree of intelligence. The economic potential is huge. And your own daughters, do they accept their place in this plan?" There was a pause before Delilah answered. "Caroline accepts our vision completely. Josephine has a scientific mind but lacks full commitment to progress. And Beatrice, she comes of age next month. Her first pairing is already arranged." "With whom?" Blackwood's voice sharpened. "Why, Lieutenant?" Delilah said with a cold laugh. "With you, naturally. Your bloodline, your military bearing, your intellect, all excellent traits to introduce into our program. Of course, you'll be paid well. Your brother Thomas has also agreed to a similar arrangement with Caroline." In the hidden passage, Josephine held back a sound of horror. Isaiah's hand moved toward the knife at his belt, but Josephine held him back. They needed more proof, more witnesses before they confronted Delilah Tane. "I see," Blackwood said after a long silence. "And Dr. Parnell runs the medical side?" "He's been indispensable. His research into hereditary traits is decades ahead of European science. Together, we are refining methods that will change how humans are cultivated. As Delilah sketched out her terrible plan, Isaiah and Josephine eased the door wider, catching a partial view down the infirmary's main hallway. At the far end, Delilah stood with Blackwood near one of the patient rooms. Dr. Parnell had joined them, offering scientific notes on the women visible through the observation windows. "My sister," Isaiah whispered urgently. "She would be in the recovery ward, third door on the right, according to Phyllis." Josephine nodded. "We need a diversion." Before they could make a plan, the main entrance burst open. Caroline Tane stood in the doorway, drenched and wild-eyed, her father's pistol held tightly in one white-knuckled hand. "Mother," she cried, "Josephine and Beatrice are missing, and I found this in the tunnel." She held up Josephine's journal, pages fluttering. "They know everything. They're planning to expose us." Delilah's face hardened to stone. "Find them," she ordered. "Search every building, every field. They must not be allowed to leave the plantation." In the hidden passageway, Josephine and Isaiah exchanged grim looks. Their chance for stealth had vanished. Now their only hope was to reach Ruth and escape before the Tane estate claimed more victims of its horrors. Blackwood had seen brutality in his military service on the frontier. He had watched the ruins after massacres, the collapse of villages struck by disease, and the cruel indifference of fate. Yet nothing in his past prepared him for the cold, organized evil of Delilah Tane's breeding program. As Caroline's announcement rang out in the infirmary, he used the instant confusion to move away from Delilah and the doctor. His right hand went to the inside pocket of his coat, where he carried not just his papers as a lieutenant, but also documents marking him as a federal investigator sent from Washington after troubling reports of illegal breeding operations. "Mrs. Tane," he said evenly, "perhaps your daughter simply went for a walk." "Do not talk down to me," Delilah snapped. "Caroline, alert Mr. Webb and the overseers. Question every enslaved person. Search every building." She turned to Parnell. "Secure the records. If needed, prepare to move the subjects." As Caroline hurried into the storm, Blackwood noticed a flicker at the hallway's far end, a door opening a crack and a man's face appearing for just an instant before vanishing. The new house slave, he realized, the one who had served at dinner with such careful watchfulness. "Dr. Parnell," Delilah continued, not noticing Blackwood's attention. "Perhaps you should show the lieutenant your laboratory while I direct the search." Parnell bowed his head. "This way, sir. You'll find our research methods quite interesting." Blackwood followed down a side passage, weighing his options. His original mission had been quiet watching, confirm the rumors, note the facts, then return with marshals to close the operation. But with the Tane girls in danger and a plantation-wide hunt now underway, the schedule had been forced forward. "Our breeding methods are based on practices already proven in animal breeding," Parnell explained as they went down a narrow staircase. "We have adapted the process for humans with notable results." "And these results are documented?" Blackwood asked, keeping his tone controlled. "Extensively," he said. 20 years of data spanning multiple generations. Proof that you can emphasize traits by careful selection." Parnell's voice had the scientific detachment of a man talking about crop rotation rather than about people. At the bottom of the stairs, they reached a heavy door. Parnell drew a key from his vest, then hesitated, studying Blackwood's face. "You seem troubled, Lieutenant. Having second thoughts about Mrs. Tane's offer?" Blackwood kept his military calm. "I'm simply taking in the scale of this operation. It's broader than I imagined." Parnell seemed reassured and opened the door. "This is where we keep our records and specimens. You'll understand the scientific importance once you—" He stopped short, staring at the room's disorder. "Someone's been here," he gasped. "The records, some of them are missing." Blackwood looked over Parnell's shoulder, noting open cabinets and a cleared desk. "Maybe Mrs. Tane moved them already." "No," Parnell said. "This is not how I left it this afternoon." He moved among the specimen jars, checking labels. "The Tane lineage documents are gone, and the breeding projections for the next generation." Blackwood seized the moment. "Doctor, I think we should return upstairs. There may have been a break in security." A sharp scream cut through the air from above. Parnell shot his head up. That came from the recovery ward. Both men ran back up the stairs, Blackwood deliberately staying a beat behind. The main hallway had become chaos. Two enslaved women had broken free from their rooms and were struggling with Nurse Hammond. At the far end, Delilah was shouting orders to house slaves summoned from the mansion. In the confusion, Blackwood spotted the enslaved person he had noticed earlier, Isaiah, urging a young woman and what looked like Josephine Taine toward a side exit. The other daughter was nowhere to be seen. Blackwood acted instantly. Reaching inside his coat, he pulled out not a pistol, but a whistle, standard army issue with a clear, high tone meant to cut through noise. He blew 3 sharp blasts, a prearranged signal for federal marshals posted around the plantation borders. The sound sliced through the noise. Delilah turned, confusion giving way to fury as she understood what the signal meant. "You," she hissed. "You're no breeder." "Federal investigator," Blackwood confirmed, producing his credentials. "This operation is over, Mrs. Taine." Delilah laughed in a brittle, dangerous way. "You fool, do you think I haven't protected myself? Much of Charleston's judiciary profits from my research. The governor himself has backed our expansion." "Perhaps," Blackwood said. "But I answer to Washington, not Charleston. Stopping illegal slave trading in places like yours is a federal priority." Parnell began to move away, clearly looking for his own escape. Blackwood kept one eye on him while he addressed Delilah. "The only question now," he said, "is whether you will face justice alone or try to drag your powerful friends into this to save yourself." Delilah's reply was not fear or denial. Her face cooled into a small, hard smile. "Lieutenant, your federal reach stops at the borders of this estate. My overseers are armed, loyal, and well paid. Your marshals may never get past our gates." She called out, "Mr. Webb, we have an intruder." Silas Webb appeared from a side hallway, the plantation overseer, flanked by 2 men with shotguns. Their faces said they would welcome a reason to use them. The standoff broke when Caroline returned, her dress splattered with mud, the pistol still in her hand. "Mother Josephine and that new house slave tried to escape through the north fields with one of the breeding women." Delilah's attention snapped to the woods. "Stop them at all costs. The documents they've taken?" At that moment, the hidden pair ducked into the next cell of the passage, hearts hammering. Josephine clutched her journal to her chest, pages damp with sweat. Isaiah pressed a finger to his lips and listened. Footsteps and shouted orders echoed through the hallways above. They could hear the distant crack of marshals' boots, the clatter of gates being closed, the low murmur of men coordinating searches. Outside, the storm that had driven Caroline in from the fields still beat the windows with rain and wind, a blur of water and dark trees. The plantation, once a place of ordered routine, had been thrown into violent motion. They crawled forward a few feet and then another. The tunnel's air was cool but stale against their faces. Josephine's thoughts raced. Ruth was their only hope. Ruth, who knew the marshal's schedule, who had promised a meeting at the old ash tree by the north fence if anything went wrong. If they could reach Ruth, maybe they could slip into the timber and ride the back roads to safety. But the documents, those records Parnell mentioned, could not be left in Delilah's hands. They proved the whole scheme, the lineage charts, the notes on selection, the notebooks that mapped which women had born, which children, and the financial projections that showed how profitable this would be. If those papers fell back into the master's possession, every plan to stop the program would be ruined. Above them, someone cursed. Steps approached the hallway's entrance. Josephine flattened herself into the earth and felt Isaiah press his weight flat over her shoulder. The pipe they had used to reach the tunnel had been masked under dirt at the entrance. They had only a few moments before the searchers might check every hidden space. A voice called out, and then another answered. The searchers' boots passed close enough that Josephine could hear their soles slap the wood and the scrape of a pickaxe against stone. Time felt fragile, like the skin on a drum. If even one of the marshals turned and looked down the tunnel, they would be found. Isaiah moved without thinking, silent and quick. He slipped from the tunnel's mouth and eased open the grate covering the drainage channel that led toward the ash tree. The space beyond was narrow, but it offered a path. Josephine followed, journal against her chest, her limbs numb with cold and fear. Ahead, the channel dropped and curved, its roof low and slick with moss. They pushed forward, crawling on hands and knees through the dark, breath held, the distant sounds of men and dogs passing above. Each inch felt like stealing a life back from the hands of those who would take it away. They came out near the edge of the north field. The rain had reduced to a fine mist. The ash tree stood as a lone shape against the gray sky, its branches whipping in the wind. Ruth was already waiting, wrapped in a rough coat, her face drawn and alert. Behind her, 2 riders adjusted their saddles. The marshal's whistle still sounded faintly from the distance, but the outer guards had been distracted by the commotion at the house. Ruth flung the saddle to one of the riders and handed Josephine a package wrapped in oilcloth that felt thick with important papers. "This is what you took from the lab," she whispered, her voice quick. "Keep it safe and get it out of state. I will go back and try to draw them away." Josephine shook her head. "I can't leave without my sister, not without Beatrice." Ruth's jaw tightened. "Then help me lead them out. Together we can split the search." Isaiah gave a short nod. They had no time for speeches. The 4 of them mounted and rode hard, mud kicking from the horses' flanks, the rain blurring the road and the world into a smear of gray. Behind them, shouts rose and the plantation erupted into a chase. The documents were safe for the moment, but the storm that followed would test every promise and every courage. In that split second, Josephine charged forward, her soaked dress clinging to her as she lunged at Webb. The unexpected attack caused him to stagger back, pistol swinging wildly. The baby screamed, but Ruth managed to shield him with her arms, pressing him tightly against her chest. Isaiah took advantage of the distraction, twisting the second overseer to the ground and pinning him until he could no longer struggle. Moses, the ferry operator, stood firm at the edge of the dock, gaff hook raised, eyes flashing with determination. With a single command, he herded the men toward the shallow riverbank, using the hook to push them back without striking. Webb cursed, fury evident in every line of his face. But the sudden coming together of Josephine, Isaiah, Ruth, and Moses left him momentarily frozen. Blackwood spurred his horse closer, taking a defensive position between the trio and the remaining overseers. "Move now!" Blackwood shouted, his voice cutting through the drizzle. Ruth clutched the baby tighter as Isaiah lifted her toward the ferry. Josephine followed, carrying the documents in one hand, and with her other she grasped the rope ladder Moses lowered from the flat-bottomed boat. The 3 scrambled aboard, hearts pounding, water sloshing against the hull. Webb finally regained his wits, raising his pistol to fire, but Blackwood's revolver cracked in response. A shot rang out, hitting the wooden deck just beside Webb's boot. He froze, eyes wide, realizing it was useless to resist. The remaining overseers, seeing their leader's hesitation, slowly dropped their weapons. Josephine's chest heaved with relief, though exhaustion threatened to pull her to the deck. Moses shoved off from the dock, and the ferry lurched into the current. The river was swollen from the storm, but the flat-bottomed boat cut through it with surprising speed. Josephine knelt beside Ruth, wrapping the baby in her wet shawl, while Isaiah kept a careful eye on the far bank, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to pale the night sky. "Are we safe?" Ruth whispered, her voice trembling. "For now," Josephine replied, glancing at the darkened shape of the plantation in the distance. "But we're not free until we reach the northern banks and the ferry landing. Every moment counts." Blackwood rode alongside the ferry, scanning the opposite shore. The marshes and banks offered some cover, but he knew Delilah's loyalists would not give up easily. "We need to move quickly. There's a shallow channel a mile upriver where the currents are gentler. We can make time there without being seen," he said, his voice steady but urgent. Josephine handed the gold locket and part of the documents to Blackwood. "Keep these safe," she instructed. "They prove everything. If we survive, they'll bring her down." Blackwood nodded seriously, tucking them into his coat as the ferry picked up speed. The first rays of sunlight began to break through the storm clouds, reflecting off the swollen river in streaks of silver. The landscape shifted from shadowed marshes to low-lying fields, still dotted with puddles and mud from the storm. The distant sound of hooves reminded them that Webb and his men were still searching, but the tide of fortune had shifted,